At 10:25 on a Sunday morning in Michigan, families were praying, children were whispering, elderly couples were holding hands. Then a pickup truck smashed through the front doors of the church. Gunfire followed, fire followed, and in less than 10 minutes, 4 people would be dead. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This happened in real time. This is the Grand Blanc church attack. Sunday mornings in Grand Blanc Township were quiet. The town sat just outside Flint, suburban, modest, familiar. Streets were calm, lawns were trimmed, church parking lots filled slowly, one car at a time. By 9:45 a.m., families began arriving at the LDS church on McCandlish Road. Mothers adjusted children's collars, fathers carried diaper bags, elderly members moved carefully up the sidewalk. Inside the building, the sanctuary smelled faintly of polished wood and old hymn books. This church had stood for years without incident. No security guards, no metal detectors, no reason to believe it needed them. At 10 a.m., the service began. Children sat beside parents, some colored quietly, others fidgeted. The mood was peaceful, predictable. No one noticed the pickup truck turning onto McCandlish Road. At approximately 10:23 a.m., a dark-colored pickup truck slowed near the church parking lot. It did not park. Instead, it idled briefly near the entrance. No one inside noticed. Why would they? Outside, the driver sat alone, hands on the wheel, engine running. Investigators later determined the truck contained fire accelerants, weapons, and explosive devices. This was not spontaneous. This was planned. At 10:25 a.m., the truck accelerated. The pickup truck slammed into the front entrance of the church. Glass exploded inward, wood splintered, metal twisted. The sound was deafening. Inside, people screamed. Some thought it was an accident, a medical emergency, a drunk driver, a terrible mistake. Then came the gunfire. The driver exited the truck holding a firearm. Witnesses later told police the shots came fast, controlled, deliberate. Pew by pew, panic spread. Parents threw themselves over children. People dove under chairs. Others ran toward hallways only to find exits blocked by debris. The sanctuary filled with dust and smoke from the impact. Screams echoed off the walls. Some parishioners were struck by bullets almost immediately. Others froze, unable to process what was happening. This was a church. This was supposed to be safe. Moments after the gunfire began, something worse happened. The attacker ignited flammable liquid inside the building. Fire crawled along the floor, then climbed the walls. Black smoke filled the sanctuary. Breathing became difficult within seconds. People began coughing. Some collapsed. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The church, once filled with hymns, became a burning maze. At 10:26 a.m., the first 911 call came in. The caller was screaming, "Shots fired! Church! Fire everywhere!" Within seconds, dispatchers received more calls. Grand Blanc Township police were less than 3 minutes away. They did not yet know how bad it was. At 10:27 a.m., the first officers arrived. What they saw: a pickup truck embedded in the front of a church, smoke pouring from broken windows, people running, coughing, bleeding, and a gunman is still active. A Michigan Department of Natural Resources officer already nearby joined the response. They confronted the attacker outside the building. Gunfire was exchanged. Within moments, the attacker was shot and killed. The active threat was over. But inside the church, the nightmare continued. Firefighters rushed in. Smoke was thick, visibility near zero.
They found victims collapsed near pews. Some had gunshot wounds. Others had no visible injuries, but were no longer breathing. 4 people would later be pronounced dead. The attack, from impact to suspect neutralized, lasted less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That was all it took. In less than 10 minutes, a peaceful Sunday morning turned into one of the deadliest church attacks in Michigan history. 4 lives were taken. 8 were injured. The shooter was down. But inside the church, the nightmare was far from over. Because what investigators discovered next revealed this attack was meant to be much worse. As the gunfire stopped, an eerie silence followed. Outside the church, police secured the perimeter. Emergency vehicles filled the parking lot. Red and blue lights reflected off shattered glass and smoke-stained walls. Inside, firefighters and medics moved carefully through the building. Visibility was low. Smoke lingered in the air. The smell of burned material mixed with disinfectant and fear. They called out. Some responded. Others didn't. Firefighters went room by room. They checked behind pews, inside hallways, near exits blocked by debris. Several people were found alive but struggling to breathe. They were carried out one by one, wrapped in blankets, faces covered in soot, eyes wide with shock. Outside, families waited desperately for news. Parents searched faces. Spouses held phones that would never ring. For 4 families, the waiting ended in heartbreak. 4 victims were pronounced dead. 2 had been struck by gunfire. 2 had succumbed to the smoke and fire inside the building. None of them had any warning. None of them had a chance to escape. Among the injured was a 6-year-old boy. He had been sitting beside his father when the attack began. Witnesses later described the father pulling his son close, shielding him as chaos erupted. Both were injured. The child survived. He was rushed to the hospital and treated. Doctors later said his injuries were serious but non-fatal. His father was also hospitalized. Their story quickly spread across the country, not because of the violence, but because of what it represented. A reminder that this attack did not discriminate. Children were inside. Families were inside. This was not just a crime scene, it was a place of worship. Ambulances transported the injured to multiple medical centers across Genesee County. Doctors treated gunshot wounds. Others treated severe smoke inhalation. Some victims remained hospitalized for days. Others were released, physically alive, but emotionally shattered. Hospital staff later described the scene as overwhelming, not because of the number of patients, but because of their ages, their fear, their confusion. While victims were being treated, firefighters continued battling the flames. The fire had spread quickly due to accelerants used inside the building. Large portions of the sanctuary were destroyed. The roof was damaged. Walls were blackened. What once held hymns and prayers now held ash and debris. By early afternoon, the fire was under control, but the building was no longer usable. The church was closed indefinitely. Once the fire was extinguished, investigators moved in. Police taped off the entire property. Federal agents arrived. The FBI took over key parts of the investigation. This was no longer just a local crime. This was being treated as targeted mass violence. Evidence technicians photographed every inch of the scene. Bullet impacts, burn patterns, vehicle debris. Nothing was overlooked. The pickup truck that had smashed into the church remained embedded near the entrance. Investigators searched it carefully. What they found changed everything. Inside the vehicle were multiple improvised explosive devices, bomb-making materials, wiring, components that, if detonated, could have killed dozens more. Authorities later confirmed the devices had not detonated, possibly due to timing or malfunction, but their presence revealed a chilling truth. This attack was meant to cause mass casualties. The shooter didn't just plan to shoot, he planned to destroy the building. Investigators began piecing together the timeline, the accelerants, the explosives, the choice of time. Sunday morning, full congregation, children present. This was not random. This was deliberate, carefully timed, and aimed at maximum impact. Authorities stated publicly that the quick response by law enforcement likely prevented a far greater tragedy. If the explosives had gone off, the death toll could have been catastrophic. By late afternoon, officials held a press conference. They confirmed 4 fatalities, 8 injured, suspect deceased, explosive devices found, FBI
Involvement? Ongoing. They asked the public to avoid speculation. They urged compassion for victims and families, and they made one thing clear. This was an attack on a community. As night fell, candles appeared near the church, flowers, handwritten notes, messages of grief and disbelief. Residents gathered silently. Some prayed, some cried, some stood in shock. Local churches opened their doors for support. Counselors were made available. Schools discussed how to talk to children about what had happened. Grand Blanc Township had never experienced anything like this, and it never expected to. Within hours, the story spread nationwide. News outlets covered the attack. Social media filled with questions. How did this happen? Why this church? Who was responsible? As journalists searched for answers, investigators focused on one key question: who was the shooter? Investigators knew this attack was planned. They knew explosives were involved. They knew it was targeted. Now they needed to understand the man behind it. Who was he? What drove him? And were there warning signs that went unnoticed? The attack was over in less than 10 minutes. 4 lives were lost. 8 people were injured. Explosives were found. Now investigators faced the most difficult question of all. Who was the man who brought violence into a place of worship, and why? By the evening of September 28, 2025, authorities officially identified the attacker. He was a 40-year-old man from Burton, Michigan. Public records confirmed his identity within hours. Law enforcement released limited information at first, intentionally. They did not want speculation, they did not want misinformation, and they did not want to unintentionally turn a criminal into a symbol. Instead, investigators focused on facts. Authorities confirmed the attacker was a former United States Marine and an Iraq War veteran. This detail immediately drew attention, not because military service causes violence, it does not, but because it raised complex questions about mental health, reintegration, and support systems. Investigators were careful in how they addressed this. They emphasized one point clearly: millions of veterans serve honorably and never commit acts of violence. This attack was the responsibility of one individual, not a group. Later that night, law enforcement executed a search warrant at the attacker's residence in Burton, Michigan. Federal agents, state police, and local authorities worked together. They searched for written materials, digital devices, evidence of planning, signs of outside coordination. What they found suggested isolation, not organization. No evidence of accomplices, no active terror cell. This appeared to be a lone actor attack. Investigators examined the attacker's phone, computer, and online activity. This process took weeks. They looked for patterns, language, obsessions, grievances. According to law enforcement briefings, the attacker had expressed hostile and extreme views towards the Mormon faith. Friends and acquaintances later confirmed he had made disturbing comments in the past, referring to members of the church in dehumanizing ways. There was no evidence of an official extremist organization directing him, but there was evidence of deep personal fixation. Authorities stopped short of assigning a single, simple motive. Instead, they described a combination of factors: personal grievances, ideological hostility, mental health struggles, social isolation. This complexity mattered because it challenged the idea that attacks like this come from nowhere. They don't. They build quietly, over time. Investigators were clear about one thing. This was not a robbery. This was not random violence. This was not gang-related. It was a targeted attack on a religious community. The church was chosen deliberately. The timing was chosen deliberately, and the methods, including explosives, showed intent to cause mass harm. Authorities released limited information about the victims at the request of families. They were ordinary people, parents, grandparents, community members, people who had gone to church seeking peace. They were not public figures, and their families asked for privacy. Vigils continued throughout the week. Candles burned late into the night. Church bells rang. Names were spoken softly. Local schools adjusted schedules. Counselors were brought in. Teachers were given guidance on how to talk to students about violence. Many children had been inside the church that morning. Some witnessed chaos they could not yet understand. Mental health professionals emphasized long-term support. Trauma does not disappear when headlines fade. Leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints released a statement expressing grief and forgiveness. They thanked first responders. They asked the public to honor the victims with compassion, not anger. Services were temporarily relocated. Congregation members supported one another. Faith, for many, became a source of healing rather than fear. Weeks later, the FBI released a summary of their findings. They concluded, the attacker acted alone. The attack was premeditated. Explosives were intended for mass casualties. There was no ongoing threat to the public. They also stated that rapid law enforcement response prevented a much larger tragedy. Seconds mattered. They always do. One of the most difficult parts of the investigation involved reviewing missed warning signs. Friends recalled troubling comments. Family members recalled withdrawal. No single moment stood out, but together the signs formed a pattern. Experts later emphasized the importance of reporting credible threats, taking extreme language seriously, and supporting mental health access. Prevention, they said, begins long before police are called. Months later, the church building remained under repair, but the community had already changed. Some members struggled to return. Others found strength in being together. The memory of September 28th lingered, not as fear, but as loss. In less than 10 minutes, a quiet Sunday became a tragedy. 4 lives were taken. Dozens were forever changed. This story is not about the man who committed the attack. It is about the people who survived it, the families who mourn, and the warning signs we cannot afford to ignore. Violence does not begin with weapons. It begins with isolation, hatred, and silence. And understanding these stories, telling them responsibly, may be one way to prevent the next one. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more real-time true crime stories told with care and respect. Leave a comment below. How can communities recognize warning signs earlier? And, as always, thank you for watching.